My parents spent Thanksgiving without me in an expensive restaurant. They laughed at the fact that I was alone, and they were in an expensive restaurant. I answered the FaceTime call, and the first thing I heard was laughter. My entire family was sitting in a fancy restaurant, holding up their wine glasses, smiling. My mom smirked and said, "Look at him, sitting all alone again." My dad shook his head. "You really have no one, huh?" They all laughed, clinking their glasses together, celebrating the fact that I was alone. That was the moment I decided I wasn't going to let this slide. This wasn't new. My family had always treated me like an afterthought. Birthdays, graduations, personal achievements, none of it ever mattered to them. I used to invite them to things that were important to me, but they always had an excuse. When I graduated college, they didn't show up. When I got my first promotion, I invited them out to dinner. They never responded. But when my siblings had their moments, weddings, job promotions, even minor achievements like buying a new car, the family went all out to celebrate. I was never included. Over the years, I learned not to expect much from them. But Thanksgiving was supposed to be different. It was a holiday about family, about coming together, and yet, here I was, alone in my apartment while they laughed at my expense. They didn't forget about me. They chose not to invite me. And worse, they made sure to call just to rub it in. Sitting there with my phone in my hand, watching them sip expensive wine and joke about how I had no one, something inside me finally snapped. I had spent years trying to be part of this family, trying to earn a place at the table. And for what? To be laughed at? To be humiliated? No, not this time. I wasn't just going to sit there and take it. I was going to make them hear. May sat there, frozen, watching my family through the screen as they continued laughing, sipping their expensive drinks, and making jokes at my expense. My sister, who had always been the golden child, leaned into the camera with a smirk. "Must be nice not having to spend money on anyone but yourself," she said. My brother, never one to miss a chance to mock me, added, "Yeah, you don't have to worry about buying gifts when no one wants to spend the holidays with you." More laughter, more clinking glasses. That I stared at them, my stomach tightening, my hands gripping my phone so hard my knuckles turned white. This wasn't just some casual oversight. It wasn't a mistake. They deliberately excluded me, went to an expensive restaurant, and then called me just to rub it in. And the worst part? They were enjoying it. It wasn't enough that I was alone on Thanksgiving. They needed to remind me of it, to make sure I knew just how little they cared. This had been my whole life with them. I had always been the outsider, the forgotten one. When I was a kid, they skipped my birthday parties but threw huge celebrations for my siblings. In high school, when I won an award for academic achievement, my mom barely acknowledged it. But when my brother made the football team, they threw a party. Even as an adult, nothing had changed. I was the first in my family to graduate college. No one showed up to my ceremony. My first apartment? No one visited. My first job out of college? My dad called it nothing special. I had tried. I had invited them. I had made an effort. And every time, they made it clear, I wasn't part of their family. I was just there. Someone to ignore. Someone to laugh at. But tonight, they crossed a line that I didn't even realize. My hands were shaking until I hit the red button to end the call. Their laughter was still ringing in my ears. My heart was pounding, and I could feel heat rising in my face. I set my phone down and stared at the wall, my mind racing that I could have ignored it. I could have just sat there, finished my cheap frozen dinner, and let them have their fun. That's what I had always done. But not this time. Tonight, they were going to hear May left my apartment and walked straight to the restaurant. I knew where they were from the background of the call. It took me 15 minutes to get there. I wasn't nervous. I was angry. When I walked in, I saw them at a table in the back. They were drinking and laughing, completely unaware. I went straight to them and stopped at their table. They noticed me and went silent. My mother looked surprised. My father sighed. My sister and brother smirked. "You never invite me to anything. You ignore my birthdays. You ignore my achievements. You ignore me completely. I tried for years to be part of this family, but you never cared. And now, you go out of your way to call me just to laugh at the fact that I'm alone on Thanksgiving." They didn't answer right away. Then my mother let out a small laugh. My father shook his head. My sister smirked. "You're overreacting," she said. That was enough. They weren't going to listen. They didn't care. They thought this was funny. That I wasn't going to walk away. I was going to make sure they understood exactly what they had done. The moment my sister said I was overreacting, my mother shook her head and smiled like this was just some childish tantrum. My father sighed, barely looking at me, and took a slow sip of his drink. My brother glanced at his phone, like he had already lost interest. No one looked guilty. No one looked sorry. They didn't even look surprised to see me standing there, furious. I stood there, waiting for someone to take this seriously. No one did. "You don't see anything wrong with this?" I asked. My voice was steady, but I could feel the anger building. "You don't see anything wrong with calling me just to laugh at me?" My father finally set his glass down and looked at me like I was the one making a scene. You always do this, he said. You turn everything into some big problem. My mother nodded in agreement. We were just having fun, she said. It wasn't serious. My sister smirked. Yeah, we thought you'd find it funny too. I clenched my jaw. Funny. I repeated. You thought I'd find it funny that my own family left me out of Thanksgiving again and then called me just to rub it in? My mother sighed, shaking her head. You always make yourself the victim. I felt my hands tighten at my sides. This wasn't a misunderstanding. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they didn't care. For years, I've tried to be part of this family, I said. I invited you to things. I reached out. I made an effort. You never showed up. You never cared. I spent every holiday alone, and now, instead of even pretending to feel bad about it, you go out of your way to mock me. No one spoke for a few seconds. Then my father let out a small laugh and shook his head. It's not that deep, he muttered. My sister grinned. You're so dramatic, she said. We're just having a good time. I looked around the table, waiting for one of them to say something different, to act like they understood what they had done, to at least pretend they felt bad. But no one did. My father picked up his drink again, already over the conversation. My mother glanced at my sister and smiled like this was just a minor inconvenience. My brother didn't even look up from his phone. They were never going to change. I turned and walked out of the restaurant. As I reached the door, I heard my mother let out an exaggerated sigh. Then came the laughter. They were laughing. Again. I walked out, but I wasn't done. I left the restaurant, but I wasn't going home. I ordered a rideshare to my parents' house. I knew they wouldn't be back for a few more hours. When I arrived, I took the spare key from under the flower pot and went inside. The house was exactly as I remembered, decorated with family photos from vacations, birthdays, and holidays I was never part of. I gathered every framed picture and threw them into a trash bag. Then I went in my old room. It was untouched, not because they cared, but because they had no reason to use it. I found a box of my childhood things, old school awards, drawings, small gifts I'd given them. I dumped it all into the bag. In the kitchen, I took 3 bottles of my mother's expensive wine and poured them down the sink. I grabbed the chocolates they saved for special occasions and threw them in the trash. I didn't take anything. I didn't break anything. I removed every trace of myself from the house. Before I left, I took the family photos outside and threw them into the dumpster. I locked the door, put the key back, and walked away. They wanted to laugh at me for being alone? Fine. Now they can act like I was never there. Allie walked away from the house and didn't look back. I wasn't sure what I was feeling, anger, relief, something else entirely, but I knew one thing. I was done. I went home and waited. I knew it wouldn't take long for them to notice. A few hours later, my phone started blowing up. First, it was my mother. Then my father. Then my sister. Missed calls. Voicemails. Texts. At first, they were confused. Did you come to the house? Then confusion turned into anger. Where are the family photos? What the hell did you do? I didn't answer. Then came the messages trying to guilt trip me. My mother texted, you always ruin everything for yourself. My father said, this is why no one wants to be around you. My sister sent, pathetic. Not a single message asking why I did it. Not a single one acknowledging what they had done to me. That confirmed everything I already knew. They didn't care about me. They only cared about control. They didn't want me as part of the family, but they wanted me to sit there and take it. To keep reaching out, hoping for a spot at the table, only to be ignored again. I blocked all their numbers. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for their approval. I wasn't hoping for an apology that would never come. I had cut myself off completely. I wasn't sad. I wasn't regretting anything. But part of me still wondered, was I wrong? Or did they finally get what they deserved? Blocking their numbers wasn't the end of it. My family wasn't the type to let things go. By the afternoon, I started getting messages from extended relatives, cousins, aunts, even an uncle I hadn't spoken to in years. Some were demanding to know what had happened. Others were already taking sides. Your parents are furious, one cousin wrote. They said you broke into their house and destroyed everything. Another text, your mom is crying. She says you ruined Thanksgiving. I ignored most of them. I knew my parents were twisting the story, making themselves the victims. They wouldn't mention the FaceTime call, the years of exclusion, the way they laughed in my face. They would only talk about how I overreacted, how I lashed out for no reason. That was always their way. Rewrite the story so they never had to take responsibility. But one message stood out. My aunt, the only one in the family who had ever been somewhat decent to me, sent a short text. I heard what happened. I just want to know, are you okay? That was it. No accusations. No judgment. Just a simple question. For a second, I didn't know how to respond. I had spent so much time being angry, proving my point, making sure they knew I wasn't going to take their treatment anymore. But now that it was over, now that I had cut them off, I didn't know what came next. I typed back, yeah, I think I am. I put my phone down. I wasn't going to explain myself to anyone. I wasn't going to chase after people who had never cared that I was done with them. Now, I just had to figure out what came next. It's been a few days, and I still haven't unblocked them. I don't plan to. Why parents haven't tried to come to my apartment. My sister hasn't sent anything other than that last pathetic text. My brother, as expected, hasn't said a word. I thought maybe cutting them off would make me feel guilty, but I don't. I keep thinking back to that FaceTime call. The way they laughed. The way they looked at me like I was nothing. I realize now that I was never really part of the family to them. I was just someone they could ignore until it was convenient to use me as a joke. That I don't regret what I did, but I keep asking myself, was it too much? Should I have just walked away without saying anything? Should I have left the photos, the wine, the house exactly as it was? Would it have even mattered? A part of me thinks they got what they deserved. Another part wonders if I should have handled it differently, but maybe that's just years of them making me doubt myself. That I don't know if I'll ever talk to them again. And honestly, I don't know if I care. What do you think?